Hey everybody, Dylan Bowman here, one of the founders of Freetrail and the host of the Freetrail podcast. Thank you for watching our video podcast. A couple of things before we get started. Number one, please do join Freetrail Pro, our great community for trail runners from around the world. There's a lot of great perks involved in that membership, and we would love to have you on board. Number two, a big thank you to our sponsors here in the video podcast. We don't do real commercial breaks, so I just want to give them a major shout out on the front end here. We have some discount codes in the show notes that you can take advantage of. Number one, Speedland, of course, the makers of the GS Tam, the shoe that bears the Freetrail logo on it, and a product that we worked on to bring to market in the spring of 2023. Our other annual partner is Gnarly Nutrition, makers of fantastic training and racing nutritional supplements that will really help you on your trail journey. We always have a third partner on the show that rotates throughout the year. So depending on who it is now, you can find a link and a discount code in the show notes for that partner as well. But a big thank you to the sponsors who do make our podcast possible. Number three, last but not least, we would really appreciate it while you're here to smash the subscribe button on the Freetrail YouTube channel. You can also click the bell icon to get notifications whenever we post new content. We are working very hard to keep you inspired, informed, and entertained here in the great sport of trail running. Thank you so much. Enjoy the show. Matt Walsh, welcome to the Freetrail podcast. Thanks so much for joining me.
That's my pleasure. I'm so excited to be here.
So we're going to talk all about media in trail running. You operate a great newsletter called Trailmix, which we'll talk all about. But maybe first, to get the conversation started and introduce you a little bit to the Freetrail audience, just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do professionally, and what your goals are with the Trailmix newsletter.
Certainly. Yes. So I'm Matt Walsh. I come from the UK, as you may be able to tell from my accent, up in the north in Manchester. But in terms of like where I came upon with the newsletter is I work in media. So I work on the advertising side of things in media. And so I work with a lot of brands in terms of how and where they should be buying kind of like media placements. And what I found with as a kind of trail run on the side as well was that there's just like so much going on in trail running. So it's like, well, I might as well apply my knowledge from media, which I've kind of built upon in the past 5 years in terms of kind of really diving into the detail. There's a lot of detail around media and trying to see if we can apply that kind of stuff to kind of trail running. So hence why I came up with Trailmix and kind of started from there.
So professionally, you work for an ad agency, and is your job to quantify the effects of advertising on brands and products?
Yeah. So I can come from the research side of things. So what we do is typically we go through vast sources, kind of syndicated surveys, so very large surveys. We do interviews with people. We kind of analyze data from different TV as well as radio publishers, as well as print and online. And what we do is kind of make a recommendation towards our clients as towards your audiences are consuming this relevant media. Say, for instance, your 18 to 25-year-olds on TikTok for 3 hours a day. And so we should be recommending putting in 3 different sets of ads in these placements, that kind of thing. We get very detailed very quickly, and we're very data focused in my job. And so for me, that kind of like richness is quite interesting, because I just love that kind of the detail that you can provide to people and really kind of try some kind of business decisions by just focusing on singular data points.
Yeah. So before we get into more of the details, and I think there's a lot there that we can expand on, I'd love to hear just a little bit more about your experience in the sport. It sounds like you're a trail runner also, and maybe just talk about the original insight as to how you felt like your voice would fit in the current media ecosystem and what you're trying to provide with Trailmix.
Yeah, so I started out trail running probably 8 years ago. I was never a runner. I didn't do high school. We did cross country back in the day, and I was the one at the back just with my friends because we didn't want to do the run. We were quite just jogging through and that kind of thing. But trail running came to me probably when I was in university. I've always had a very large hiking background, and I've always wanted to try and expand the distances I ran or distances I traveled when it came to kind of going outdoors. And so for me, traveling was that kind of gateway into doing that. And so I kind of started from there. My walks turned into runs, and now my runs turn into very, very, very long runs in terms of ultramarathons. So, for instance, I've got the Lakeland 100 coming up in, I think it's 8 weeks now, which is going to be quite daunting. But my first 100 miler, but it's one of those things that it should kind of develop from there. That's kind of my history with trail running, and I think it was that kind of inspiration which really drove me into kind of starting the whole newsletter and everything.
Yeah, well, your newsletter is fantastic, and I'm sure I'll say that many times over the course of our conversation here. And you were kind enough to sit down with me about 6 months ago to help me sort of think about Freetrail and ways in which we could optimize our business as somebody who is very much trying to be a media operator, but who doesn't come from, that professional experience. So I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me then. And I'm excited to have you on the podcast now. I figured we'd start by talking about your most recent newsletter, where you sort of unpack the demographics of trail runners. And you say that the demographics are maybe surprisingly similar to golf, which might be counterintuitive to a lot of our listeners here. So for those who aren't subscribed to the Trailmix newsletter, maybe you could just kind of summarize the findings of that study, and more generally, why demographics are important to this greater media conversation.
Certainly. So with the study itself was done by a guy called Carl Morris in Lancaster, and it was all really just about understanding trail runners. And it's something that I've kind of had as a quandary throughout this whole kind of process of trying to analyze the media market in trail running, is that everyone has a different idea of what the trail runner is or who they are. Like, you go to a trail race and you will see a whole variety and mixture of people. And so you'll think, oh, okay, trail running is a really diverse sport, and it's we have lots of young people as well as old people, and a great mixture. And then when you go online, there's loads of anecdotal information around, like, oh, my friends are very scientific and they're into trail running. Therefore, a lot of kind of trail runners are really scientific. It's kind of, that's great. But without actually overall understanding the audiences and who trail runners are, the products that your brands and your media corporations, your even race organizations create in terms of like the media they're putting out there, in terms of the messaging they're using, the ads they're doing, whatever, it's all going to be skewed to a certain audience towards like who they think the kind of their bias is towards, like who the trail runner is. Yeah. So without kind of knowing that, we're going to be creating a lot of kind of biased information out there, and going to kind of construct an entire ecosystem that kind of caters towards one type of audience. So this kind of information that kind of Cobb produced with the study was really fascinating, in that he just did a very large quantitative survey of US and UK fell, trail and ultra runners, and compiled them all into a public study. And what was really interesting about the demographics, which was just one part of a lot of different things, was that, what he found was, in his summary, I think it went something along the lines of, trail runners are predominantly white, middle-aged, and economically privileged, and highly educated people. And so all I did really was took that kind of general audience and applied it to our kind of normal demographics of other sports. And we follow the same lines as golfing and the same lines as Ironman, which is absolutely fascinating, because you don't put the two together, right? You don't put a golfer and a trail runner together, but demographically they're very similar. So that kind of opens up conversations around, okay, so when it comes to brands that should be participating in the sport, should we be talking to the likes of Rolex? Rolex sponsor golfers, sponsor golfing tournaments, because they know their audience is going to be quite rich with wealth, and they're quite highly educated, and they're looking for those kind of things. That same audience is us. So really, should we also be contacting like Rolex and such like that? It opens much broader conversations, but it also kind of opens other kind of avenues as towards. So we actually have a very small population of young trail runners. There's not that many in like the below 25 age bracket. Why is that? And it's this kind of like research and kind of information about demographics, which really kind of alters our kind of perception of media, and kind of answers a lot of questions as towards why are we seeing the content that we're seeing.
Yeah. And as a media researcher, I'm sure it was really thought-provoking for you. And of course, the sport can do better in terms of diversity. And I think that's a different conversation for a different day. But am I correct in assuming that the demographic that exists in trail running is an attractive one to advertisers? Can we expect to see Rolex and BMW sort of coming into the space in the same way they play in golf?
Completely. That was the kind of thing, is that the reason advertisers, of course, will look at an audience, and the reason they look at an audience is because they want to know, will they have enough wealth to afford our product? So if you are a kind of an everyday kind of Coca-Cola, demographics don't matter too much to you. But when it comes to more expensive products, like, yes, the hotels, the kind of watches, the cars, all those kind of things mean that they'll be looking at those kind of the audiences that are bizarrely that are trail runners. Yeah. When it comes to sponsorship still, and I think you need to be expanding maybe.
I'll send an email to the sports marketing.
Yeah, definitely.
Rolex there afterwards. So there have been two major developments on the media front that I'd love to have you unpack. The recent partnership and distribution deal between UTMB and L'Équipe in France and Outside Interactive here in North America. Also, the Golden Trail World Series and their partnership with Eurosport. But before we get to both of those, I'd love to talk about just live streaming in general. It feels like we are at the dawn of a new age in sport, where race broadcasting is really truly turning into a fantastic product and a great viewing experience. So maybe generally, can you just kind of talk about the importance of distribution for sports like ours, and any other sort of just thoughts or reactions about this early evolution in live streaming?
Yeah, completely. And it's one of the most interesting and fascinating areas of trailing, but of sport at the moment in general. So to kind of cast a wider picture around kind of the kind of distribution and that traditionally sports from the early kind of 20th century have all been kind of looking at how they can distribute through mass media. And for sports going from the 90s, that a lot of the time was TV. And when they found that TV actually brought a lot of audiences and was able to kind of connect the fan towards the sport and actually captured a very large audience, advertisers got involved, and media is funded largely by advertising. And so for the past 20 odd years, there's been very much a standardized output of if you are a sport, you are a league. You need to be thinking about your distribution, and you need to be thinking about it through TV. That's the goal. That's the golden goose. But what we've seen, of course, over the past 5 years, is that different partners coming into it. So you have live streaming from a direct to fan thing. So you have the likes of even UTMB has it at the moment in terms of their website, where they are live streaming on their website. That is direct to the fan. You can go through YouTube as well, and that's live streaming as well. And that kind of circumvents the traditional method of go to traditional media broadcasters, because they will produce that reach that you need for a kind of a sport to grow. Because that is, again, the ultimate idea, is that more kind of publicate, more kind of reach of your product, your sport, equals more fans, and therefore more money for your advertising, and therefore more revenue for you as a sports league. And that's kind of the chain reaction. And so that's kind of been the whole kind of paradigm of the past kind of 10 years.
Yeah. So are you as impressed as I am about how quickly it feels like things have evolved on the race broadcasting front?
Yes. Yeah. So much. I think probably the past 3 years or something, where I've kind of been properly following it. But it's gone from we have highlight packages, and the odd sport maybe kind of has someone following along behind them with a kind of a camera, to now where it's you look at kind of Jamil's work and the innovation he's got there. it's absolutely fascinating, from drones to using Starlink to kind of following people on bikes and having that kind of data at the bottom in terms of the formats, the visualizations. There's so much innovation that like trail running is going through so rapidly that I think I always thought we're kind of playing catch up a lot of the time. I was thought, oh, maybe we're just kind of trying to get to where everyone else is in the sport. But actually, I think we're already caught up and we're getting ahead. I think because like with the likes of like using Starlink and such like that, it's ahead of a lot of other kind of sports that are kind of traditionally struggling with this in the niche realm size.
Yeah, I'd love to come back and talk about Jamil here in a second. I saw him at an event in Southern California last week, and we were talking about the Cocodona live stream that they executed. And he said that I think he said it was over 100 hours of broadcasting over the course of the 250-mile event, which of course is a massive endurance undertaking in itself, but also a wonderful service to the community. And there was consistently 1,500 people watching this 250-mile race evolving at a snail's pace over the course of a week. And I think it just shows the appetite that exists out there. I think as we start talking about mainstream media distribution, 1,500 viewers doesn't feel like an attractive number. They'd probably want to be seeing numbers, orders of magnitude larger than that. But I think it signals just the appetite that's out there, and with the proper packaging and storytelling, just how incredible the viewing experience is. Maybe another thing that's just coming to mind now from me that you could comment on. I think I can't recall specific numbers, but I know I've heard multiple times in various places that with Tour de France coverage, the mountain stages are significantly more popular and gather more viewers than the time trials or the sort of flatter stages. I'm wondering if there's something that we can draw a relationship to there in terms of, maybe if UTMB or Sierra Zinal, if they are able to create a broadcast experience in a package and distribute it appropriately, is that a more compelling viewing experience than something like the Boston Marathon? Anything you want to sort of react to there, just in terms of landscape meets drama of competition?
That's it. I think it's the spectacle and the drama, right? I think we can talk for days about distribution mechanisms and everything else. But if you don't have a product that is captivating, that draws people in, I was saying about the mountain stages, one of the best things about the mountain stages for me anyway, is that it's the kind of, you can feel the pain they're going through. They've been grinding up that hill for absolutely hours. It's hard to comprehend that also they've also done 10 days worth of like 100 to 200 mile kind of cycling. And they're there just kind of grinding up that hill. It's as a viewer, it puts you in that kind of perspective of like, you can kind of feel it. And it's that idea that with additional drama, with that kind of spectacle that it is, you kind of need that in a sport, really, because I think when we come to like Sierra Zinal, which was interesting in terms of, we'll come to it later, but the Golden Trail series, they struggled with actually putting it on live stream, and hence why I wasn't involved in the Eurosport package. But if you saw it the other week, throwing it down with rain, it was muddy, it was a horrible thing to actually kind of think about. Yeah. But everyone is out there. There's so many people in the chat, there's so many people watching it, and some people were impressed. Like, that's the thing. I think a lot of like ultra running is a human endeavor. It's a struggle, and I think that's something that really appeals to people. And so we don't need to have like the kind of speed of a 100-meter sprint. We have that kind of human tenacity that kind of ultra running trail runners show in their sport. I think if we kind of package that up in a way that draws people in, keeps people engaged, I think we do have a kind of a perfect arena here for what could be a really entertaining sport. I think it just needs those tweaks.
I love it. And I feel very much the same. And you're referencing Zagama, which happened a couple of weeks ago.
God, yeah.
It was rainy and muddy, but with thousands of adoring spectators and fans, and a great visual experience for those who tuned in to the broadcast. And we'll come back and talk about Golden Trail Series here in a second. I wanted to start though with UTMB because that deal was announced first. And really, I'd like to go through both of these new partnerships in detail and have you give us the broad strokes of what it actually means for the race organizations and for the sport in general. So starting with UTMB, can you just kind of give us the high level details of this new partnership between L'Équipe in France, Outside Interactive here in North America, and just, the general details around it?
Yeah, so the UTMB and L'Équipe and kind of the Outside deal were relatively similar in that. So it was UTMB have had a partnership with L'Équipe last year, and they had it was 2 hours of live broadcasting of UTMB for kind of 2 hours at the start and I think 6 hours at the end of the actual race itself. So it wasn't a lot, but it came up with additional packages in terms of like they're a news organization, so they had content aside. With this year, they have extended that partnership with L'Équipe to you had 10 live streaming packages on L'Équipe Live, which is their online broadcast, the kind of live over-the-top platform. And then you have, again, the UTMB 100-mile event still has the same 2 hours and 6 hours. With Outside, it's very similar in that it was they now live streaming 10 different events on their Outside Watch platform, but they also have kind of their highlight package as well as some additional content on the Outside Fast channels as well, which is something that is not really useful for UTMB that much, but it's something that's quite interesting considering in terms of the future of kind of broadcasting and live television. But we can come to that another time. I think what's really interesting about this kind of development from UTMB was that it shows them their kind of strategy as towards they're going more towards the online live streaming audience versus going direct to that kind of traditional going to the live TV on broadcast, as we kind of talked about earlier. Now, when I kind of had a look at that initially and the kind of the initial deal, I was a bit almost disappointed because live streaming is great. But what they kind of failed to mention in their actual kind of press release was that they're also showing the exact same live streams on YouTube. So for a fan, why would you go to L'Équipe or Outside when you could just watch it on YouTube and have the chat functionality there and have a lot more there? So in terms of the additional distribution of it, yes, you're on different owned platforms, but they kind of cannibalize each other. The value that UTMB is accrued by these things isn't that much greater in terms of attention. It might get greater revenue for them in terms of its additional spots for their advertisers to be advertising in. So then it now can go on, if they advertise with UTMB, they're now on L'Équipe and Outside. So it's a great package for them to sell. But the actual benefit for the fan wasn't there for me when I kind of saw these initially. And I think it will be interesting to see how it develops because the likes of Canyons as well struggled with their live broadcast already. And so that was part of one of the packages. Yeah. So how they can advance with this if they're already struggling with their production capabilities is another question, really.
So am I right in assuming that people like you and I would definitely go to YouTube to consume this product directly, but that the benefit from UTMB's perspective would be that through L'Équipe and Outside, they'd be able to potentially speak to new audiences who otherwise haven't?
Yes, yeah, completely. And that's going to be thinking like Outside, of course, with the US captures the whole outside sports arena now with all the kind of the publications they have. So they're always going to be trying to look for additional kind of reach there spontaneously happening upon this new content that they're live streaming if they're going on live Outside Watch. Same again with L'Équipe. They saw some great numbers through L'Équipe last year. I think it was something like 2.3 million watched it live on the TV. But we didn't have any kind of live streaming numbers, so we don't know what that would be this year. It would be interesting to see what the differences are. It would be quite fascinating to kind of watch that develop over the time to see whether we see this difference between the broadcast live and the on demand.
Can you explain the economics of how this works? Understanding that you, I'm sure, don't have the inside information, but typically, for example, the NFL here in the United States sells its broadcast rights to the highest bidder, various media distribution channels. Is that what's happening here? Can we assume that Outside and L'Equipe are paying high-priced media rights deals to UTMB in order to have the rights to broadcast?
So that is a question I would love to know the answer to. And I have hounded a lot of different journalists and PR departments about this. But so my initial reading of this, what it seems to be, is that in terms of the deals with Outside and with L'Equipe, from the surface, it sounds like they have just, it's a kind of a trial run for the L'Equipe and Outside. They're donating this space and allowing UTMB to kind of broadcast in here, knowing that for the L'Equipe and Outside, they have the benefits of having that additional content, like I was talking about Outside with their fast channel. That's a free ad-supported TV. And so that is a channel that is just 100% ads with content on the side. And so they rely on more content. When it comes to the kind of the media rights deal with L'Equipe, they didn't increase their TV space in terms of the live broadcasting. So for them, the deal hasn't changed that much. To put something on live stream online isn't that difficult, because you can have with L'Equipe, I think there's 3 different channels. So you can have 3 different things going on all at the same time live. So there's not much difficulty for them there. And so with that, it's mostly a shared thing. When it comes to traditionally with like, we'll come to it later, but with like sort of the Golden Trail series, kind of the rumors around that one in terms of how they got their media rights deals, it's really interesting and fascinating for us to kind of know this information, because it's all about what is the value of trail running as a sport. Mm-hmm. Media rights deals are great to know for their numbers, because it's really interesting, fascinating to know, like 100 million, 8 million spent here and 3 billion here, whatever. But it's that value that's tangible that we can then apply to kind of trail running in terms of the future, towards how do we grow as a sport? And then again, we have to then think about the distribution of that money. Does that additional media rights mean a growth for our sport in general?
Yeah. Really interesting. And yeah, I want to expand on this a little bit further when we get to the Golden Trail series, but maybe talking about Outside specifically here for a second. Part of their relationship with UTMB, or their agreement through Trail Runner magazine, was also having some written publishing. And you made a point in your newsletter to reach out to Zoe Rome, the great editor-in-chief over there at Trail Runner Mag. And she was careful to say that there will be a strict editorial independence maintained with Trail Runner magazine. And everybody who knows Zoe trusts that, you know, she is the exemplifies journalistic integrity. And I pulled a quote out of your newsletter here where she said, UTMB will in no way be able to influence our content outside of an agreement that we will do previews for the events, but they can't influence how, when, why we do them. There is an editorial firewall that won't be violated, and no partnership will change that. And it reminded me of another newsletter that you had written that engaged Zoe also, just kind of talking about the state of sports journalism more generally. So I'd love to open the door to that conversation about, you know, the current state of media and why that's made the journalism business model really difficult. And maybe you could speak specifically about, you know, why that's the case in trail running.
Yeah. So with journalism in general, it's kind of gone through a rocky patch in the past 20 years, largely because journalism and news as advertising is funded. So that is attention. That is, are people actually, in terms of online media, clicking on what we're producing? And so for a lot of kind of news organizations, when they gear towards that thinking as towards, okay, so money equals people, more people equals more money. Therefore, we need to just keep making content that people keep clicking on. And so in that scenario, it's always going to be what we call service-based content, so content that serves a purpose. So in trail running, that is your shoe review, that is your the best foods that Jim Walmsley recommends for a race, that kind of thing. People always click on them. It's evergreen. People really want to know about these things. People are always looking for shoes. There's going to be loads of people clicking on that. And that content's really great. It serves a purpose in terms of it serves people. But when it comes to journalism, what I was kind of talking to kind of Zoe about and again other editors, what I wanted to know was the stories that dive into let's say kind of the background to these deals that we're talking to in a media context, maybe, or maybe even holding a UTMB account for certain policies that they're implementing. These things that really journalism always traditionally done in terms of kind of making sure that there is accountability and responsibility for people's comments and actions. And when it comes to that kind of realm, it doesn't attract the same amount of attention or impressions, clicks that service-based content does. So as a media organization who's funded by advertising, you always have to kind of balance this, but the balance will always shift towards the most popular, interesting stuff that gathers the most advertising for dollars, which is that. So journalism over the past kind of 10 years has kind of shrunk down in terms of newsroom jobs, in terms of actual kind of media organizations. You've seen over the past kind of 5 months really in this year, so many, I think 4 or 5 different media organizations closing themselves. BuzzFeed News, not exactly the highest pillar of journalism, but their news organization actually shuttered shop completely. Yeah, it's one of these things that, as a sport, is interesting for us, because what do we value really in our sport? Do we value just learning constant shoe reviews, or actually do we value hearing and holding all our kind of organization, our racers, runners, all these things to account, hearing the stories, the backstories, all these kind of interesting things that we want to know about the wider sport and will help develop our kind of the storylines, the kind of the whole general atmosphere around trail running, the fandom of it. We want to know that, or do we want to keep developing that? And that's kind of the issue with kind of, or the tension anyway, with modern media companies at the moment who are largely ad reliant.
Yep. I think the example you use in the newsletter was about a journalistic piece that Trail Runner magazine did around UTMB's non-binary policy and how little traffic that got in relationship to an article about Camille Herron's training strategies. So when the incentive is getting, eyeballs and therefore selling advertising to keep your operation and your employees, employed, the incentive is to get things that advertisers want, and journalism isn't necessarily, doesn't really provide a great product for advertisers. So there's a tension there that I think journalists across all different sports are dealing with right now. Before we get to the Golden Trail World Series, I'd also love to give you a chance to talk about the UTMB Media Impact Report that you did last year, just after UTMB Mont Blanc at the end of the summer. And you sort of did a deep analysis about UTMB and the conversation that was specifically happening on Twitter. So can you maybe summarize the findings of that impact report and some of the things that maybe were surprising that you learned?
Yeah, I think so. To a bit of context to that, after kind of a UTMB last year, I was really intrigued by just looking at that impact, because it's one of the first times that we've had the full-fledged UTMB media production team going all at it. And I just wanted to see, was there an impact? And so in terms of on the likes of Twitter, I looked also at kind of like search volumes as well. The actual kind of size of the conversation was tremendous. And I think what was really interesting for me was that in terms of kind of it was all around races, and it was all around specifically, like, of course, Kylian Jornet producing the highest volume there was fascinating about that, which is obviously he was going to capture it, but it was the volume versus other people. So it was like, for instance, Kylian would have, can't remember the exact numbers now, but close to 1 million video views for one video that was put onto TikTok, whereas every other video that they UTMB produced on TikTok, they had maybe 10 to 100,000, not too much. But it kind of goes to show the impact of having almost celebrity runners involved with a organization, involved with a race. And so I think what was kind of takeaway there was that, yes, for a race to kind of actually make an impact, yes, you can have the greatest production ever, but if you don't have the right people, you're not going to generate that attention. And then you kind of look at the flip side in terms of, okay, so what about kind of women's racing, which we know there were had some issues, let's say, with the actual kind of production of it in terms of showing equal time of women on the broadcast. The actual mentions of those were lower, but they're still quite significant relative to other men as well. So there's an equal balance there, outside of putting Kylian Jornet aside, equal balance there in terms of kind of the awareness and the conversation around individuals, which is really fascinating to see. And especially when it comes to like searches afterwards as well. The actual search of trail running, ultra running, those things skyrocketed afterwards. And so again, for the sport, it goes to show that when we put kind of more focus on the intention in terms of distribution in live streaming and in terms of having things on YouTube and Lower Queep, like Lower Queep actually was one of the larger mentions of that weekend on kind of French Twitter all around trail running, which was a fascinating thing to see in like the top 10 Twitter lists, like trending. Fascinating that trail running could drive that attention, and only by kind of analysing what people were saying and looking at these kind of search results and everything else social related, we're able to see that like trail running actually can make an impact. Trail running is getting attention, and people are very interested. We just need to kind of figure out the whole kind of distribution and making it all kind of packaging up, really, like a 100-mile race. How do you make that kind of viewer friendly?
Yeah, I'm just I pulled up the PDF here on my computer because I downloaded it. And one of the things that I think is really interesting that you found, and this is just specific to the Twitter conversation, is that in France, 13.8 million people were reached, which is roughly 21% of the entire population of France. Was at least there was an impression from a Twitter conversation with 21% of the French population around UTMB. It's a fascinating saturation. Of course, that is their home country. And of course, the French are proud sportsmen and fans of endurance and mountain sport, unlike a lot of other populations. But I think it's an exciting data point for how our sport can really speak to audiences and really become appointment television for populations around the world. So maybe let's transition and talk a little bit about the Golden Trail series, because I think this is also a fascinating, conversation that you'll be able to add a lot of color to. Maybe just first explain what the new deal is with Eurosport and how it's similar or different from UTMB's distribution deals with L'Equipe and Outside.
Yes. So Golden Trail Series this year going on Eurosport, I think, is the absolute highlight of the package. And so for listeners that don't know about Eurosport and its reach, it's across all of Europe. It was originally founded as a sporting arm of the European Broadcasting Association, just to kind of buy sports packages and distribute them. So this is 53 countries we're talking about here, 20 languages. I can't remember the exact reach of kind of Eurosport here, but it's going to be somewhere close to about 50 odd million. So it's a lot of people. And so what this kind of new deal kind of showcase was the Golden Trail series has kind of got 2 hours worth of live footage on their Eurosport 2, I believe it is, physically on broadcast for 2 races that are the, I believe, Series Inal and Mont Blanc Marathon, but also we have the 2 other races in terms of the final. They're showing both the women's and men's final first stage. And so, yeah, it's fascinating from that point, because it's a complete change from UTMB. UTMB going for that live streaming with sticking largely online, yet we know that they have those kind of 2 to 6 hours that didn't really change on Lair Queep. Golden Trail Series are kind of taking the lead here and gone, right, we're going to go for the biggest broadcast in Europe, and we're going to go large. So securing this distribution, live TV is an absolute boon for Golden Trail World Series.
Yeah. In your newsletter, you talk a little bit about the competition that's evolving between Golden Trail and UTMB for fan attention and for advertisers. What's your high level evaluation as to how that's playing out and who's executing better in that competition?
I think, okay, so let's take it from the perspective of media distribution. So when it comes to attracting advertiser dollars, you want to make sure that you have right distribution in the right places to the right people. So as we've kind of talked about with demographics earlier, our demography is largely a middle-aged older audience. That is the same audience that is a pay TV audience. So people you have to pay to kind of watch Eurosport, like you do like a normal kind of core TV. That means that from a Golden Trail Series, for me, they have got the edge here, because they are kind of broadcasting and distributing their content to people that are going to be more aligned to the demographics of the sport. We also know that kind of the European population of trail runners is quite vast, let's say, and the actual attention, as we kind of showed with the kind of Twitter data, is already there. So putting onto the kind of one of the biggest sports broadcasters in Europe really wins from my side in terms of distribution. When it comes to, let's say, the content format, UTMB have been relatively strict, let's say, or limited with their actual content they're putting out outside of their races. They've done their live stream. They'll do maybe a highlight package for the big races, but they have 34 different races. It's very hard to kind of create all this content for all these different things, and knowing you're only live streaming some of them. So I think they're struggling with the breadth. And so as, again, when it comes to in terms of the media value of that, you struggle to see how they can really expand when all they can do is just keep adding more live streaming to their individual races. Yes, it's more distribution, but you then have to ask, what's the actual attention to all these individual races? How do you maintain it for an entire season of, it's not even a season, but 34 different races? Yeah. It's going to be very difficult for them to commercialize. When we look at kind of the content around Golden Trail Series, I remember listening to a podcast with Greg Flay himself, and he was he called trail runners the actors and the race the stage, which was a very interesting observation. But for me, it kind of gives a little insight into his mindset in terms of he's seeing sport as an entertainment product as his goal. He sees Golden Trail Series as an entertainment product. So he's gearing a lot of everything in terms of his content and distribution, in terms of kind of the race series and the formats of them, in terms of his like changing with the finals over time, trying to experiment with what works. Mm-hmm. They're really gearing towards trying to make sure that they have the lifestyle content there. Kind of their social feed is always filled with like little tidbits from athletes as well as the race highlights. Yep. You have, of course, their kind of highlight their, what do they call it now? They've got the highlight package, but also the kind of Drive to Survive type documentary series that they have on YouTube, which was, I loved it. During lockdown, that was actually one of my favorite things to watch. That really kept me going. But it just goes to show that the entertainment factor is there for trail running. You can really build a story and narrative around trail running as a product. It's there. And I think Golden Trail Series are really winning that race. So for me, they're going at it two different ways, UTMB, going for the more live streaming online, seeing what works there. I think Golden Trail Series, by being quite bold with their approach, of also having, of course, shorter kind of race series benefits them, but just being bolder in their approach into broadcasting really is kind of, for me, the winning kind of recipe.
Yeah, I agree. And Greg has been a pioneer in trail running media since his earliest days at Salomon, with Salomon Running TV, which I think in many ways accelerated this growth trajectory that the sport has been on for the last 15 years. You mentioned the format, and I figured this would be a fun thing to talk about too. Obviously, Golden Trail Series racing is shorter than most of the UTMB races are. And I wondered if you had any thoughts or comments on short distance versus long distance and how that might impact media rights deals. What's more attractive to the distribution engines and to advertisers?
Yeah, it's a difficult one to kind of difficult challenge for UTMB, let's say, when it comes to any form of ultra running kind of producer or race director. You have almost over 24 hours worth of kind of footage to be getting through and to be filming. Maybe if you just want to be focusing on the front runners, you've got 11 to 15 hours there you've got to be covering a race for. As from a media rights owner, that's really difficult to kind of sell because you know that not many people are going to be paying attention for the entire thing. Tour de France went through the exact same period when they were kind of growing. They went through multiple different kind of organizations towards trying to sell their product, and in the end had to settle with kind of a news organization, and it worked. And it became one of the biggest things. But it was only after, I think it's a period of like 30, 40 years that they actually were able to commercialize Tour de France as a product. And even still, Tour de France is actually one of the smallest earning race series in cycling that there is, even though it's one of the biggest there is. So there's still that difficulty there. And when we think about our kind of media landscape as we are now, everyone's trying to move towards shorter. So everyone from in terms of the content we're kind of seeing and the kind of formats that, of course, social feeds are producing, they're all geared towards social short form content. Whereas, so in that respect, you'd think, okay, Golden Trail Series, there's a lot more advertisers that want to go for shorter form because they know that they can have an audience that's actually engaged with the viewer, with the ads at the time. They know that people are going to be seeing it, paying attention. And so within the battle of attention, the shorter format is always going to be winning. When it comes to media rights deals, they're likely to be able to get higher media rights deals because, again, the product is interesting, product engages audiences. People are willing to sit down for 2-3 hours to watch a race to come to its conclusion, but they're not willing to sit unless they're kind of doing the ironing and washing the pots or something to watch an 11-hour epic. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, unless it's me.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think this is one of the reasons why I'm so bullish on shorter distance trail racing right now. Is obviously it speaks to a much larger audience, not only from a participation perspective, but from just a fan perspective and people who would be willing to sit down and consume that broadcast experience. It's a much larger pool of people that would watch a 1 or 2 hour race versus a 15 to 24 hour race. Back to the economics question, you speculate in the newsletter that the Golden Trail World Series has a time buy relationship with Eurosport. Can you explain what a time buy is and how that's different probably from the UTMB model?
Yes. So a time buy is typically, in terms of media rights deals, typically a kind of a sports product, be it a league, be it a race series, will go to a broadcaster and they will have to, the broadcaster will then pay for the rights to show that. So we have like an NFL, huge rights deals. We have, everyone has kind of huge valuations because you're essentially giving the broadcaster a lot of interesting content that people really want to watch. Now, with a time buy, that whole kind of transaction is reversed, where if you're a sports organization that is trying to prove itself almost, you don't have a large audience, you don't have the numbers or the kind of the economics to showcase that there are a lot of people paying attention to your sport. what you have to do is you have to put money up to the broadcaster to pay for that time on their channel. So it's a very niche thing. It really rarely happens. The last recorded rumor of that on a more broader scale was LAV Golf or Live Golf. They were scheduled. Well, they were meant to be kind of talking to NBC about doing a time buy there to be able to put their kind of whole golf series on there. That kind of fell through in the end, and LAV Golf hasn't really succeeded at the moment. But it's super rare, and I think it's one of those things that, as a sport, again, I admire the boldness. I think we need to do this. Mm-hmm. I think it's a risk because you're putting a lot of money up. I think we need to do this. This is all, I heard this through different sources, let's say, as towards kind of what they speculated it would be based on their conversations with Eurosport previously. Mm-hmm. But it's one of those things that we need to be putting our content out there. And if it means Golden Trail Series making this risk, making this leap, I think it's a great move for them. And obviously, well, we'll see how it kind of proves out. But I think in terms of economics, if they can then prove from these kind of 8 hours worth of content on Eurosport and have the exact kind of economics of, we were on one of the largest broadcasters in Europe. We got this amount of audience. We got this amount of advertiser attention and retained attention for this amount of time. This is really compelling. This is how you start building that media rights engine. This is where the kind of the money starts coming. And I know we're very capitalist in our conversation at the moment, towards money. But the end goal here is that the broader the media rights deal, the better in terms of the product is, the more potential kind of revenue for kind of runners in terms of hopefully the pops that they have. We know that doesn't necessarily always work with UTMB, but we know that is a potential and what should happen in the end.
Yeah. Well, it's just creating a bigger pie that will hopefully enhance the trail running experience of people with the front, middle, and back of the pack. I'd love to talk a little bit more about kind of broader media trends. And one thing that I'd love to hear you speak about selfishly is just kind of the bundling and unbundling of media. Like obviously Outside has rolled up all these different sort of outdoor and lifestyle publications. Meanwhile, the environment for individual creators like yourself has never been better with Substack and podcasts and things like that. I sort of get self-conscious that we're kind of taking a middle path between those two things at Freetrail, sort of being a media brand, but that is sort of creator led. Can you talk about sort of the current media environment and how you see the balance between individuals and institutions?
Yeah, it's a fascinating story in terms of following media at the moment, because we've gone, as you say, from media being produced by other people. Media is something that back in the day, you'd be a journalist, maybe you'd work at a news organization, a radio kind of program. They're really small jobs, not many people get them, and media was produced for you. You consume the media, that was it. You consume that. The whole kind of democratization of media formats, media kind of channels, making like newsletters more easy to do, podcast easy to make. It's one of these fascinating things that's allowed new voices to come in and to kind of really open up the whole landscape. So what's really interesting in that divergence is that, of course, ultra running, trail running as kind of history hasn't had that mainstream attention. It's had a few niche publications that have serviced it in terms of I Run Far and Trail Runner and Ultra Runner magazine. But they're small, there's not many. And so as this kind of democratization came in, we of course had a really large bottom-up upswelling of like fan-generated content. We've got like podcasts like yours, we've got a whole rich podcast ecosystem. We have newsletters starting to kind of come up as well. We have a huge amount of YouTube content from like Billy Yang and such like that, and other vloggers and kind of video things. And so it's one of those really fascinating things is that from a media perspective, we have all this new content and we have it all from different personal perspectives. We've got a whole richness there. But now we have, as you kind of alluded to, we have so much there. It's like, how do you, as a individual organization stand out. And so this is where we start to be seeing this whole kind of unbundling kind of aspect come in even more. So the likes of Outside, of course, bundled because they saw that all these individual outdoor sports, all their publications were actually unprofitable, but they served a really niche that are really committed to them. And so they're like, okay, so outdoors people actually like multiple sports, and we should probably bundle it all together. We bring it all together. They like reading things, but they also like watching things. Let's put that all in like one subscription package. And then that's what people buy. It's therefore they're not buying subscriptions to individual things. They're buying that whole thing, the whole lifestyle around being an outdoors person, outdoor sports enthusiast. And so the bundle comes in there, it becomes a popularity. But then you have to kind of contend with the economics of, okay, so you have a whole bunch of things and Outside again, in terms of, as an example, in terms of the problems of bundling, is that you have so many different communities, so many different content formats, all trying to serve different purposes. How do you as an organization, again, make sure that you are kind of giving the right attention to all these individual things and serving all your individual communities without kind of watering it down? And what we've kind of found is that that's a very hard task to do. It's a very hard thing to commercialize. So the subscriptions work to a certain extent, but you need to still have ads, which then mean you still need to have service-based content, which mean you have to service different people. And so like the whole history of unbundling and bundling, we're kind of seeing again now more of an unbundling towards more people going, well, you know, I could just have a unique voice and be myself on this one individual thing. And that could be more profitable than me being actually getting into this bundle. So it's a confusing, complex, let's say, place to be. But it's really interesting that there's lots of different business models. So as a media organization like yourself, Dylan, like you can diversify in so many different ways.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to put more time on your calendar to have you advise me a little bit more specifically. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll resist the temptation to talk about the whole Outside thing more at this point. But I think there's a rich conversation to be had just about that, you know, and who they're targeting, because I very much view myself as being in the center of the bullseye of the type of person that subscription product is meant for. Somebody who would never subscribe to Velo News, for example, but who would be interested in reading the occasional article. But, you know, with the Gaia mapping, for example, that alone is worth the price of the Outside subscription bundle to me. But at the same time, yeah, how do you stand up an entire, you know, media ecosystem around that sort of like low price subscription product? It's a tough problem. And I think they're feeling that right now as the whole economy and ad market gets shaky at the same time. So I'd love to hear you talk about other sports that are doing a good job, like outside of trail media. Is there something that you look to right now that you feel like, you know, people like Freetrail can learn from, that are sort of executing well in niche sports?
Let's think. So in terms of, I think one really good example at the moment is something a lot of your audience might not be aware of, rugby in general. So rugby union is something I follow a lot, and that has traditionally been kind of the, I guess you'd call it like kind of the second sport to soccer in the UK. Now, they've always had kind of TV rights deals and things like that, and they've always been quite traditional. And they always attracted quite a upper middle class audience, and they've been quite kind of, let's say, like strict with their content. They've just been producing the same old thing over and over again. And so they got to a pattern where they didn't produce anything interesting apart from kind of producing the highlights and the package. And so what they've done as an organization, the kind of the rugby football union, is that they purchased a media arm. So there's kind of a whole rugby website, Rugby Pass, that they bought, and they produced, they kind of now produce a lot of content that helps kind of push up the whole institution of Rugby Football Union, but pushing to new audiences. What Rugby Pass do really well is they really do kind of like the kind of Drive to Survive, like behind the scenes content. They go to individual schools, they literally kind of high schools and kind of colleges, and they talk about the rugby teams there. They go to kind of Sunday league rugby clubs. They really build up the community and build proper intelligent content around it. It's not just isn't this funny? It is like proper in-depth kind of content, and it engages a lot of people. Like I follow it and follow it for years. Whereas the kind of whole product of kind of professional rugby has been relatively the same here and there. Like you follow your team and they'll develop some interesting content. And that's it. But this whole kind of development of building out a medium, knowing that the individual kind of organization yourself isn't necessarily doing the best job and doesn't have the capabilities to do it, really has been quite interesting in terms of now reaching entirely new audiences, which really kind of develops again in terms of, let's go back to economics, in terms of like the actual product of it, media rights deals. You have more people, you have more advertisers coming in, more kind of people trying to target younger audiences that this content kind of targeting. Again, it adds different layer of story to it, that narrative. There's a richness that they're kind of talking in and around the games themselves. The whole kind of package of like pre, during, post content is rich in terms of not just let's do an interview and let's talk about the game, but let's have people like just fans commentate on it and what their perspective, get the humor involved. It's something that's really like kind of sometimes missing from traveling a lot, is kind of like we're a very serious sport, but if we had more humor, this kind of thing, it really adds to that whole kind of flavor really of how you engage with your sport.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I'll check that out, and I think you're spot on. And I think it does always come back to content meets community and lifestyle, right? And where those three circles converge in a Venn diagram is where the best media exists, at least in my opinion. Wrapping up, I'd love to hear just quickly kind of what your goals are for the future of Trailmix. Like what can people expect to see you tackling here in the second half of 2023 and beyond?
Yeah, so like I'm going through a busy patch with work, but what I kind of tend to do with Trailmix is really kind of develop it from a perspective of making sure that these deals, these kind of new storylines that are coming out about the kind of media that UTMB are producing and Golden Trail Series get attention, but also that wider ecosystem. I want to make sure that I'm not just focusing on the big kind of race directors and things like that, but also the individual podcast producers, the individual kind of the writers that are making interesting storylines. There's a lot of narratives that in and around our kind of media landscape, which I think we just aren't touched. We don't really talk about our own media that much. And so from a kind of Trailmix perspective, I want to try and make sure that we're kind of pushing that up to the forefront. Like these things are important. Like these things are how the sausage is made, for lack of a better term. Wow. So for us as kind of like consumers of this content, we should know and want to be interested in this stuff. So I'll be kind of writing a lot about that. And hopefully again more into kind of an interview series as well. No podcasts. I can't do the whole constant. Like, I don't know how you do it, Dylan, in terms of producing so many podcasts. All the content you do, it's incredible. I'll be sticking to written newsletters. That is me.
Well, you do a great job. So before we sign off, I've got a couple of closing questions that have become tradition to ask our guests here on the show in recent months. And the first one is, who is one person that you admire inside or outside of sports, can be living or dead, and why is it that you admire that person?
I'm going to give a very niche reference to your followers and your listeners. A man called Andy Burnham. Andy Burnham is the mayor of Greater Manchester, and as a northerner born and bred, the kind of swing of politics, everything in economics, the focus and attention is always on the south. Andy Burnham has been very strongly kind of putting forward his kind of conviction that the North should be a better place, it should be having greater attention. And I think for me, in terms of what I admire about him, to be really specific, is he's actually he's putting a lot of action behind his words. He's put a lot of courage and a lot of conviction behind his passion, and it's coming out in terms of acting. A lot of politicians, a lot of people will always say a lot of big things, but he's actually proving it in action. And I think that's something I so greatly admire in terms of people that not only have strong conviction but follow it up with even greater actions.
Walk the walk and talk the talk, right?
Exactly.
Lead by example. I love it. Final question for you. What is one truth that you've learned about yourself or about life in general through your participation in trail running?
I think for me, like, let's go very soft here. It's you are better. You can do more than what you think you can. I think it's very simply like doing this whole training for the 100-miler. You look at a training plan. It is daunting. It is, you look at the mileage you're meant to be doing and all the back-to-backs and everything, and you're like, I don't physically think I can do that. Yeah. But you build it up step by step, small increments every week, every day. You're doing something, contributing to it towards, hopefully, in 8 weeks' time, touch wood, you actually have a 100-mile race and you finish something that very, very few people can ever think about. So it's that thing of like, you can actually do better. You just have to, again, the time, the effort, small things here and there, doesn't have to be big, but just developing that. That's really kind of changed my perspective as towards like how I approach any form of challenge really in life. It's never, nothing's too big or too daunting. You just have to kind of break it up and kind of go forward with that.
Step by step. I love it. Well, Matt, it's been great to have you on the show. I'll encourage all of our listeners to go subscribe to the Trailmix newsletter, and maybe we can continue this conversation in future episodes as some of these rights deals evolve and the sport continues to grow. But thanks so much for your time and your insight.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Tim. It's been amazing.